Liz Cheney's hand came down hard against the polished wood of the committee table, the crack echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. Her voice, sharpened to a blade, cut through the air with fury. "Duh, you're being dishonest," she snarled, eyes narrowing as if the sheer volume of her accusation could overpower the truth. The sudden burst of rage stunned the chamber. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, whispers caught in their throats, reporters' pens froze above their notepads. The camera snapped instantly to focus. Every lens trained on the woman at the receiving end of Cheney's thunder. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her hands, didn't lean forward to match the hostility. Instead, she sat perfectly still, as though carved from stone except for one detail, the calm glimmer of a smile tugging at her lips. It was subtle, quiet, but enough to ignite a new tension in the room. The silence grew thick. Every person present seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the explosion that so often followed when tempers clashed in American politics. But the eruption never came. Cheney's face flushed red, her breath uneven, as though she expected her opponent to shout back, to meet fire with fire. Yet Crockett's composure became the center of gravity, pulling all attention toward her. The moment crystallized into something larger than just two lawmakers. It wasn't simply a question of truth or dishonesty. It was the image of old power, shaking with anger, colliding with a new kind of authority, one built on patience and control. For progressives watching, it was a reminder of every moment they'd been told to stay quiet, every time they had seen rage try to drown out dignity. And so, with Cheney's fists still lingering against the table, the room itself seemed to bend toward Crockett, as though everyone knew instinctively that the real story would not be written in Cheney's volume, but in Crockett's silence. What followed would determine not just who won the exchange, but whose vision of politics would define the future. But what Crockett did next wasn't anger. It was something far more powerful to anyone watching that exchange. It may have seemed like just another clash in Washington, a burst of anger, or a few sharp words, a headline for the nightly news. But beneath the surface, something much bigger was unfolding. Liz Cheney's outburst wasn't just a personal attack. It was a moment that revealed how power defends itself, how the gatekeepers of the old order try to decide who belongs and who does not. For years, American politics has been carved up by insiders who wear authority like a crown. The rules are unspoken but deeply felt. Pedigree matters more than service, family name more than lived experience, and rage more than reason. Cheney is a product of that world. The daughter of a political dynasty, she inherited not only her last name, but the unshakable belief that her voice must always carry weight. When she slammed her hand down on that table, she was not simply accusing Jasmine Crockett of dishonesty. She was signaling that someone like Crockett, with her background, her accent, her unapologetic identity, could never truly be qualified to stand on equal ground. It's the heart of America's polarization. Not just red versus blue, but establishment versus disruption. Insiders versus those who dare to speak with an accent, wear their hair natural, carry the scars of struggle, and still walk into the chamber with their head high. Crockett represented a new generation that wasn't bred in backrooms of power, but forged in neighborhoods that knew struggle intimately. To some, that made her voice less legitimate. To others, it made her voice indispensable. That tension hung in the air. For millions of Americans watching, Crockett wasn't just defending her own name. She was carrying the weight of every immigrant told to wait their turn, every working-class activist dismissed as too emotional, every young black woman asked to tone herself down just to be heard. Cheney's rage was directed at one person, but the message echoed outward: you don't belong. And yet Crockett's silence, her steady gaze, her calm smile, those carried their own echo. They whispered back, I do belong, and I don't need to raise my voice to prove it. The stakes, then, were not only Crockett's dignity, but the credibility of every voice that has been silenced by power. If she faltered, the establishment would smirk, nod, and carry on as though nothing had changed. But if she held her ground, if she transformed that moment of attack into a demonstration of strength, it would ripple outward far beyond that room. because this wasn't just Crockett's fight. It was the story of who gets to claim authority in 21st century America. It was the clash of a dynasty rooted in entitlement versus a disruptor rooted in struggle. It was a confrontation between the brittle rage of the old guard and the unshakable calm of a rising generation. And as Cheney's anger hung in the air, like a storm cloud, the silence before Crockett's reply grew electric. Everyone sensed it, even if they couldn't yet name it. This was more than politics. It was a generational clash. The outcome would echo far beyond the walls of Congress. To understand the meaning behind Liz Cheney's furious outburst, you have to understand where she comes from. Liz Cheney is not merely another member of Congress. She is the daughter of a dynasty. Her father, Dick Cheney, is one of the most powerful figures of the last half-century, a vice president who operated in shadows. A master of Washington's machinery, a man whose decisions shaped wars abroad and the very nature of power at home. Liz inherited not just his last name, but the aura of entitlement that comes with being born into that orbit. In Washington, doors opened for her before she even knocked. Her career was scripted in advance. Law school, policy posts, media appearances, LZ. The traditional stepping stones of someone groomed for a political crown, and she played the role well. With her sharp suits, sharp elbows, and sharper words. Cheney built a brand as the heir apparent to conservative seriousness. She cast herself as tough, unyielding, unwilling to bend. To her supporters, it looked like principle. To her critics, it often looked like arrogance dressed as conviction. There were moments, of course, when Cheney broke with her own party and captured headlines for standing against what she called the big lie. Those moments gave her a sheen of principle, a flash of independence. She was praised as brave by commentators who wanted to see cracks in the Republican monolith. But even those stands, when pulled apart, revealed contradictions. Cheney could denounce a demagogue in one breath and still cling tightly to the policies, the privileges, and the power structures that had enriched her family in the first place. It was a performance of bravery that always stopped just short of real transformation. That is the duality of Liz Cheney, a woman who sometimes appears to risk everything, but who in reality risks nothing she cannot afford to lose, while she rails against lawlessness, yet defends the very system that allows it. She speaks of honor while carrying the legacy of a war that shattered nations. She presents herself as a defender of democracy, but only on her terms. Only within the boundaries of a narrow definition of who belongs at the table. And so when she stood across from Jasmine Crockett, her voice rising, her hands slamming down, she was not merely angry, she was defensive. Because Crockett represented everything Cheney's world was built to resist. Crockett hadn't inherited power, she fought for it. She hadn't walked into politics through a dynasty she carved. Her way in with grit, lawsuits, and grassroots organizing. That difference exposed Cheney's fragility. It showed in her tone. The more she spoke, the sharper her pitch became. What began as authority began to sound shrill. What was meant to intimidate began to feel desperate. Even those in the room who agreed with her message could sense it. There was something brittle. In her delivery, something unsteady. This is what happens when entitlement meets disruption. The foundation cracks. Cheney's fury was not just aimed at Crockett's words, but at what Crockett symbolized. The unraveling of an order that had once been unshakable. And in that unraveling, Cheney's voice betrayed her. Because here is the truth of power: it doesn't have to shout. True authority doesn't need to slam the table. When Cheney raised her hand and her voice, it wasn't strength on display. It was weakness. It was the panic of someone who realizes that their grip on the narrative is slipping. That their dominance is no longer guaranteed. The louder she yelled, the more her grip slipped, and while Cheney's anger filled the room like thunder, it only set the stage for the calm, deliberate lightning that was about to strike from Jasmine Crockett's side of the table. Long before Jasmine Crockett ever sat in that committee room, staring down the fury of Liz Cheney, she had already lived through battles that would break most people. She was not born into privilege, not handed a dynasty, not gifted a seat at the table. Crockett's story began in a working-class household where struggle wasn't an abstraction, it was daily life. She knew what it meant to see bills stack up, to watch parents stretch paychecks, to feel the constant reminder that dignity in America often comes with a price tag. Her path to power was not smooth marble hallways or ivy-covered campuses. It was long nights, second jobs, and the relentless grind of someone who had to fight for every inch. Education was not just about ambition, it was about survival. Crockett pursued law not because it was fashionable, but because she saw what injustice looked like up close and could not tolerate watching it go unchallenged. She knew that too many voices in courtrooms never got heard, too many lives were trampled. Under paperwork, bureaucracy, or bias. She chose to become a lawyer because she wanted to tip the scales, even if only slightly, toward fairness. And when she entered that arena, the cases she took on reflected her purpose. She represented the working poor, the marginalized, those who couldn't afford the kind of lawyers that political dynasties keep on retainer. Her work was not glamorous. It was gritty, often thankless, but it mattered. Each client was more than a name on a file. They were a story, a life, a reminder of why she had chosen this fight in the first place. She stood beside people who had no seat at the table and gave them a voice. That experience forged something deeper than ambition. It gave her resilience. Crockett learned to withstand hostility, to absorb insults, to outlast the condescension of judges, prosecutors, and politicians who looked down at her as if her very presence was an intrusion. Each time someone tried to dismiss her, each time she was told she wasn't polished enough, connected enough, or compliant enough, she added another layer of armor. Not the kind of armor you wear on the outside, but the kind you carry within them. Unshakable belief that her story was as American as anyone else's. When she eventually ran for public office, she did so with that same energy, not to elevate herself, but to lift others. Her campaign wasn't built on big donors or backroom deals. It was powered by volunteers, neighbors, and everyday people who saw in her someone who spoke their language, who understood their reality. She didn't wear elitism like a badge. She wore authenticity like a shield. When she won, she carried that weight into the halls of Congress, but it was not a burden, it was a responsibility. She represented the people who never felt represented, who were told politics wasn't for them, who believed that their struggles didn't count because no one powerful ever paid attention. Crockett became their conduit, their amplifier. She carried the weight of people who never had a seat at the table. This is why her calm in that moment with Cheney mattered. It wasn't passivity. It wasn't weakness. It was strength distilled from years of being underestimated, years of proving people wrong, not with anger, but with results. Her smile, faint but steady, was not the smile of someone unaffected, was the smile of someone who had already fought harder battles and endured harsher words, who had faced far more intimidating opponents than a red-faced lawmaker yelling across a table. That calm was earned in courtrooms where judges dismissed her clients, in communities where justice felt impossible, in campaigns where every dollar had to stretch twice as far. It was armor forged in fire. While Cheney thought she was shaking Crockett's confidence, all she was doing was unveiling the depth of it. Because Crockett's story is not about ease, it is about endurance. It is not about inheriting power. It is about demanding space where power once said no. Her background is not a liability. It is her greatest strength. It connects her to the people she serves, grounds her in reality, and prepares her for confrontations where others would fold. So when the chamber grew silent, when every camera pointed at her, Cheney's voice still quivered in the air, Crockett didn't have to summon courage. She already carried it. Her smile said everything her words hadn't yet. I am not afraid of you. I have lived through worse, and I am still here. That was the foreshadowing of what was to come. The calm smile was not a reaction in the moment. It was the culmination of a life of resilience. It was not the absence of fear. It was proof that fear no longer held sway over her, and it was about to become the very weapon that would dismantle Cheney's authority piece by piece. Without ever raising her voice, Cheney's voice did not soften after that first thunderclap. If anything, it grew harsher, jagged at the edges, as though volume alone could bend the room to her will. She cut across the discussion, interrupting not only Crockett but anyone else who dared to speak. Every pause became an opening for her. To sneer, every question, a chance to double down on the accusation of dishonesty. The veins in her neck pulsed as her hand once again slapped the table, punctuating words that were less argument than performance. Reporters scribbled faster. The audience in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, and staffers darted nervous glances at one another. The scene had transformed into something theatrical, Cheney playing the role of the scolding heir guarding the gates of legitimacy. Yet for all her fire, the blaze lacked substance. The more she shouted, the clearer it became that her fury was not about truth, but about control. Crockett, however, refused the bait. She sat in measured stillness, her composure. A sharp contrast to Cheney's restless movements. Where Cheney gestured wildly, Crockett kept her hands folded. Where Cheney's voice ricocheted across the room, Crockett's silence grew heavier, more commanding. That stillness became its own form of defiance. Each interruption only amplified the difference between them. Cheney looked increasingly agitated, talking over answers that hadn't even been given, sneering with a smirk that felt less like confidence and more like desperation. Meanwhile, Crockett's refusal to rise to the noise turned the tables without her saying a word. She let Cheney burn her energy, let the cameras record every flash of temper, every pursed lip, every flash of disdain. It was cinematic, the old guard flailing, the new guard unmoved. The villain raged, certain that louder meant stronger, while the hero wielded patience like a blade, slicing away the facade without lifting it. Crockett knew that silence in moments like this speaks louder than shouting. She allowed Cheney's words to collapse under their own weight, each outburst less persuasive than the last. Even the spectators felt the imbalance. Gallery leaned toward Crockett, waiting for her response, sensing that she held something back. The longer she stayed still, the more they anticipated what was coming. Cheney, blind to it, kept digging deeper into her rage, her performance betraying the very fragility she wanted to hide. It was no longer just two politicians clashing, it was a study in opposites. Fury against calm, noise against patience, privilege against resilience. One woman unraveling before the cameras, the other quietly gathering power in the pauses. And then, just as Cheney's latest accusation echoed into silence, Crockett moved. She leaned forward, just slightly, with that quiet smile. Crockett leaned in, not fast, not aggressive, but with the deliberate pace of someone who understood the power of timing. The quiet smile never left her face. It was the kind of smile that carried centuries of patience, the kind of smile that didn't need to outsell anyone to be heard. In that single gesture, she claimed the room. The silence that followed was deafening when she finally spoke. Her voice was soft but unwavering, like a stone dropped into still water. "Congresswoman Cheney," she began, "you've accused me of dishonesty. That's a heavy word. And if you're going to use it against me, then let's make sure we're being honest about what we're really talking about." Gasps rippled through the chamber, not because of volume, but because of precision. Crockett's words cut clean, scalpel-like, while Cheney's had scattered like shrapnel. Every camera zoomed closer, every microphone strained, sensing that this was the moment the exchange would turn. Crockett continued, her cadence deliberate, her tone steady. She didn't rush, she didn't need to. "I did not come to Congress with a family dynasty behind me. I didn't have my path paved before I ever ran. I came here from the courtroom where I stood beside people who had no one else to fight. So when you talk about honesty, let's talk about whose honesty gets questioned in this country and whose never does." The words landed like a hammer cloaked in velvet. Cheney's face tightened, her lips pursing as if she had been struck, but couldn't show it. The cameras caught it all, the slight flinch, the narrowing eyes. Crockett pressed forward, layering her case like an attorney presenting evidence to a jury. "I've watched my clients called liars because they didn't have the money to prove otherwise. I've watched neighbors dismissed because they spoke with an accent. I've watched young women told they had to wait their turn, told to quiet down, told to smile, but never to lead. And now here I sit, accused of dishonesty, because I dared to bring that truth into this chamber. The murmurs grew louder. Weight of her words stretched beyond Cheney, beyond the committee room, into the millions who would later see the clip. Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for every person who had ever been silenced. Every person who had ever been branded dishonest simply for not fitting into the mold the establishment approved. Cheney tried to interject, her voice cracking slightly as she began. That's not, but Crockett didn't stop. She lifted her hand slightly, not in a gesture of aggression, but in one of calm control. The way a conductor steadies an orchestra. The interruption died on Cheney's lips, and Crockett's smile deepened to not smug but certain. I don't need to shout, Crockett said softly. I don't need to pound this table, because the truth doesn't need volume, doesn't need rage, it just needs to be heard. The chamber erupted not in noise, but in stunned stillness. Reporters glanced at one another, realizing they were witnessing the soundbite that would play again and again across networks. The clip destined for millions of views online. Cheney's entire posture shifted, her shoulders stiffened, her jaw clenched, her authority fraying in real time. Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned even closer, her eyes locked on Cheney's, her voice still calm. You want to talk about honesty? Let's be honest about power. You were born into it. I had to fight for it. You inherited a seat at the table. I had to pull up a chair and demand one. And the reason my presence bothers you isn't because I've been dishonest, it's because I'm proof that your way is not the only way. The words were surgical, each one slicing through the facade Cheney had built over decades. The cameras caught Cheney's reaction, a hard swallow, a nervous shift, her once commanding tone shrinking into silence. She tried again to interrupt, but the attempt faltered. Her stuttered beginning trailed off into nothing. Crockett straightened slightly, letting the weight of her statement hang in the air. And then, with that same quiet smile, she delivered the final blow. So call me dishonest if it makes you feel stronger. But the truth is, Congresswoman, the only thing that's dishonest here is pretending that your voice is worth more than mine. The chamber erupted this time, not in applause, but in audible gasps, shuffling, the kind of electric buzz that comes when a room knows it has witnessed history. Cheney's face hardened, her eyes flashing, but the power had already shifted. The louder she had yelled, the weaker she had become. Crockett, with calmness and precision, had dismantled not just her argument, but her authority. Crockett didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. Her calm smile had become the weapon that undid a dynasty. The moment that exposed the brittleness of rage when met with dignity. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards, already drafting headlines. Crockett silences Cheney with calm takedown. Clips of the moment would soon ricochet across social media, slowed down, subtitled, remixed into viral affirmations. That room, in the seconds after Crockett's words, what mattered most was the silence of Cheney, with no retort, no recovery, no escape. That silence was victory. That silence was justice. That silence was the viral moment in its rawest form. And yet the story was not finished. Because outside those walls, beyond that chamber, a storm was brewing. Millions would soon see what happened. Millions would soon claim it as their own. The clash had shifted, and its shockwaves were about to spread far wider than Cheney or Crockett could have imagined. The moment Crockett leaned forward with that quiet, devastating smile didn't end when the gavel struck. In many ways, it had only just begun. Within minutes of the exchange, the clip spread like wildfire. On X, the hashtag Crockett Smile shot to the top of trending lists. First regionally, then nationwide. Screens filled with looping GIFs of the exact second Cheney faltered, her jaw clenching as Crockett's calm dismantled her rage. TikTok edits slowed the moment down, pairing it with cinematic soundtracks, captions flashing across the screen. Dignity is the ultimate clapback. Memes erupted in every corner of the internet. Split screens compared Crockett's composure to iconic moments of quiet defiance. Rosa Parks, seated firmly on the bus. Serena Williams, staring down an umpire. Michelle Obama reminding the world, when they go low, we go high. On the other side of those memes, Cheney's face was frozen in mid-outburst, mouth twisted, eyes wild. The contrast was brutal, and it stuck. Commentators across the political spectrum couldn't ignore it. On progressive platforms, Crockett was hailed as the embodiment of what it means to hold power with grace. She didn't just win the argument, one pundit declared. She redefined the battlefield. Even center-left anchors, often cautious in their praise, admitted that Cheney's fury had backfired spectacularly. She underestimated her opponent, one veteran journalist remarked, and in doing so, she revealed just how fragile her authority really is. Meanwhile, Cheney became the subject of merciless ridicule. Late-night hosts pounced, replaying her outburst followed by Crockett's devastating calm. Punchlines wrote themselves. One host quipped, "Cheney brought a sledgehammer to a duel." Of Mine's Ann, Jasmine Crockett brought a mirror. Laughter rolled across audiences, but beneath the comedy was a sharper truth. Cheney's power was cracking. Everyone could see it. On TikTok, younger audiences turned the moment into a rallying cry. High school debaters mimicked Crockett's steady cadence, lip-syncing her words with captions like, "How to win any argument." College students stitched the clip into motivational reels. Stay calm, stay sharp. Let them unravel themselves. The smile became not just a meme, but a metaphor, a shorthand for resilience in the face of rage. And yet the ripple effect didn't stop at pop culture. News headlines declared, "Crockett turns Cheney's fury into viral lesson on power." Editorial boards weighed in, some calling it a generational shift. Others noting the symbolic stakes, an heir of a political dynasty undone by the quiet strength of a newcomer who had fought her way to the table. For immigrants, for women of color, for communities long dismissed as unqualified. The moment was more than entertainment, it was validation. Social feeds filled with personal stories. This is exactly how it feels when your boss yells, and you just smile because you know you're right. This is how my grandmother taught me to survive in rooms that weren't built for us. The smile became a language, a cultural shorthand, a shared inside joke that carried generations of resilience. Meanwhile, Cheney's defenders scrambled. Some tried to downplay the clip as overhyped. Others insisted she had been taken out of context. But the images told the story more clearly than any spin could. Side-by-side comparisons flooded timelines, Cheney red-faced, shouting. Crockett calm, steady, smiling. The contrast required no commentary in living rooms, classrooms, and office spaces. The moment sparked conversations about more than two women in a chamber. It raised questions about who gets to define credibility, who gets labeled dishonest, and who has to smile through rage just to be heard. Crockett's smile wasn't just composured, it was a mirror held up to a system that had too long mistaken volume for truth. By the time the late-night monologues finished and the morning headlines rolled in, the smile had cemented itself in political history. It wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It was a cultural moment, one that would be replayed in documentaries, studied in debate classes, remembered as a turning point in how America saw power. But while the internet celebrated and laughed, while hashtags soared and memes multiplied, a deeper current began to form. Because this clash, raw and electrifying as it was, had implications far beyond viral fame. It wasn't just about one room, one argument, or even one viral smile. It was about what came next, and the impact stretched far beyond that room. When the dust settled and the echoes of Cheney's shouting faded, what remained was not the memory of rage, but the image of a woman who refused to be shaken. Crockett had taken the storm head-on and emerged untouched, her quiet smile lingering as the final word. Something larger than a political skirmish became clear, because Crockett's response was not just about defending herself. It wasn't even just about disproving Cheney's accusations. It was about reframing the very idea of power. For too long, American politics has rewarded those who yell the loudest, those who treat every disagreement like a battlefield. But in that moment, Crockett flipped the script. She reminded the country that strength is not measured in decibels. Strength is measured in dignity. Asterisk, she didn't match rage with rage. She didn't stoop to Cheney's level, didn't claw for dominance. Instead, she embodied something far more lasting: composure rooted in truth, resilience shaped by experience. Her calm was not passivity. It was defiance. It was the kind of quiet that says, "I have survived worse storms than this." For millions watching, especially those who have been silenced, overlooked, or told they didn't belong, the lesson rang clear. Crockett showed that representation is not only about taking up space, it's about transforming it. Her presence at that table, her refusal to be rattled, spoke for every person who has ever had to smile through prejudice. Every worker talked over in a meeting, every immigrant dismissed as unqualified. Her calm was not just her own. It was collective armor, carried for generations. The moral was as sharp as it was inspiring. You don't need to scream to have power. You don't need to match the fire of the old guard to prove yourself worthy of the new. Crockett's victory was not just rhetorical, it was spiritual. She proved that truth, delivered with dignity, can cut deeper than any insult. And so the narrative shifted. What began as an attempt to corner her with accusations became a testament to resilience. What was meant to humiliate her instead elevated her. The villain raged. But the hero stood tall, not because she shouted louder, but because she refused to shout at all. The crescendo of her example rippled outward, leaving viewers not only entertained, but moved. Parents told their children, "See? That's how you win with calm, with truth," young women wrote online. Her smile is the blueprint. And across the nation, people who had never heard Jasmine Crockett's name before now saw her as a symbol of something rare in politics: grace under fire. In the end, Crockett reminded America of a simple truth. It often forgets that dignity is the most disarming weapon of all. That silence, when wielded with confidence, can be louder than fury. That representation is not about taking center stage to shout, but about embodying a strength that inspires others to believe they belong to. You prove that in America. You don't need to shout to be heard. And with that, the lesson was sealed not just in headlines or hashtags, but in the hearts of those who watched and saw themselves reflected in her resilience. It wasn't just Crockett's victory. It was a reminder to everyone: dignity endures, rage burns out, and truth spoken calmly always finds its mark. In the end, it wasn't Cheney's thunder that defined the night, it was Crockett's calm smile. That single expression, quiet but unshakable, told the whole story. The moment rage lost and dignity won. No matter how loudly Cheney tried to dominate, she could not drown out the power of composure. The smile became the image replayed across screens. The proof that arrogance will always collapse under the weight of truth, and that's the lesson worth carrying forward. Dignity isn't weakness, it's the highest form of strength. It outlasts the sneer, the insult, the outburst. Crockett showed us that when you hold steady, when you refuse to be dragged into the chaos of someone else's anger, you not only protect your own voice, you magnify it. That is how change is made. That is how representation grows. Because this moment wasn't just a debate stage spat. It was a reminder of what politics in life should look like: grace against hostility, poise against panic, courage to stand firm, not by shouting louder, but by refusing to bow. Crockett's smile was more than an answer to Cheney. It was a mirror for all of us, showing what resilience looks like when tested. If you believe in that strength, if you believe dignity is greater than arrogance, truth greater than noise, then don't let this moment fade. Share it. Talk about it. Carry the lesson forward. And if you want to keep seeing stories that uplift, that reveal the power of calm in the face of chaos, make sure to subscribe, stay connected, and stand with dignity. Because Crockett's smile wasn't just hers, it was ours, and its power is only beginning.